Good evening, Lake Orion. Welcome to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. I want to talk to you guys today about a very interesting subject that came out as we were celebrating the 4th of July. There was an interesting discussion or interesting article that I saw on CNN that the last battle of the American Revolution was actually fought in India between the French and the British. So it made me wonder about, could the American Revolution have been a world war? And it was also seen as a civil war. That's one of the big questions that I get is there were several events that were considered world wars, not just World War I and World War II. So it asks the question, what is a world war? Okay? So a world war, you would think of, it's an international conflict that involves all the world's global powers. Usually, it's reserved for World War I and World War II. The term First World War was used by a German biologist and philosopher, Ernst Haeckel, who feared that a European war would become a world war, which it did. If you remember with World War I, you had the alliance systems of Germany, Austria-Hungary, later the Ottoman Empire. You had Britain, you had France, you had Russia. All these countries went to war, and it resulted in a European war becoming a world war. Now, a lot of that was seen as several European countries had colonies all throughout the world. Case in point, you had the scramble for Africa. You had European countries had territory in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East. So I mean, you could argue that they were going to be doing fighting all over the globe. So you could argue it could be seen as a world war. But thus, the European war would become a world war, and the concept of the First World War was introduced. So in World War II, we would see the end of European colonialism, but it also led to the rise of two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, and I've covered that in the past in my past History Now shows as well. Historians, however, and we've seen much more of a focus on, they viewed other events in the world as world wars. And you could argue this could be easily seen as the 600s with the battles between the Saxon Empire and the Byzantine Empire. They had the war that took place from 602 to 608 AD, in which it was a very vicious war between both of those countries, and it was fought mostly in the Asian regions, but it was also seen as a world war. Then you'd have your religious battles. You have between Christianity, Judaism, Islam. You'd have events with the Roman Empire. You'd have issues with the Portuguese and Ottoman empires, basically Christianity versus Islam. So you had your Jewish and Muslim battles as well. So you had a lot of religious battles that you could argue were also world wars as well. There's 8 wars in particular that historians tend to view very much as world wars, and I'm going to go over them a little bit, not as much in depth. I'll probably save that for future episodes. But I want to go over two of them first before we go to our break. The 80 Years' War, which was from 1566 to 1648. This was also a war between Protestants and Catholics. You had the Dutch Republic, you had England, Both of them were pretty much Protestant. And then they went to war with Spain. Portugal at that time. Spain and Portugal were kind of together at that time. And then the Holy Roman Empire. They were predominantly Catholic. There ended up being a 12-year truce. But what also happened was the 30 Years' War from 1618 through 1648. This was mostly fought in the Holy Roman Empire, which is present-day Germany. You had battles also in Italy, but Italy was not a country at that time. It was also fought throughout the globe, as Spain, Portugal, England, Netherlands, and France all had colonies throughout the globe. Bourbon France, which was under the Bourbon Empire, they were primarily Catholic. They entered the fray in 1635. Now, in northern France was primarily Protestant. In southern France was Catholic. But the majority of France was Catholic, so it was very surprising to see France side with the Protestants. Excuse me. There was also the battle between the Dutch Republic and Spain. Spain had territory in the Netherlands. And then you had France was also going to war with Spain in the Americas and throughout the globe. But you had that battle between the Bourbon dynasty and the Habsburg dynasty, which was the Holy Roman Empire, and then at that time it was Spain as well. But then you had the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which the balance of power shifted from the Habsburg Empire to the Bourbons, to the Bourbon family, which was the Bourbon dynasty, which was France, under then the powerful King Louis XIV. So now France has this balance of power after the 80 Years' War. But England's still there, the Dutch Republic's still there, the Holy Roman Empire's still there, though crumbling, still there. You had Russia, you had Spain, you had Portugal. Portugal had broken from Spain in 1641, 1642. And so you had all these countries. So it was really between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. And this would trigger into the 9 Years' War in 1688, which would last to 1697. Now, historians would see this as the, quote, First World War, as this was fought in Europe, the Americas, India, and Africa. In the Americas, which is the United States, present-day United States and Canada, this was seen as King William's War. King Louis XIV was a powerful ruler in France. There was a lot of concern about his power, how his influence throughout Europe. So there was a grand alliance that was formed between England, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, which was Austria, and the Dutch Republic. And then they were led by William III, who was the King of England, and who was also William of Orange. They fought to a stalemate. It led to the Peace of Ryswick in 1697. It forced Louis XIV to recognize William III as the King of England, but it was also seen as a temporary peace. They were very concerned about the future, especially in Spain. When we come back, we're going to talk about what was happening in Spain, and eventually it would lead to another, quote, civil war between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons here on History Now, here on ONTV.
9, 8.
Are you or someone you know having thoughts of suicide or experiencing a mental health or substance abuse crisis? 988 connects you to compassionate, confidential support for free.
988.
988 is the new 3-digit dialing code for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. For years, the Lifeline, formerly known as the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, has answered tens of millions of calls and helped people overcome mental health-related distress. 988 is the same trusted resource. When you call, text, or chat 988, you'll be quickly connected to trained crisis counselors who will listen to your concerns, provide support, and get you additional help if needed. There is hope. The Lifeline works. You are not alone in crisis. Just call, text, or chat 988.
988!
Knowing how to identify signs of crisis in others and help connect them to resources like the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is an important way to prevent suicide in Lake Orion. For information about free suicide prevention trainings offered in our community, please visit the North Oakland Community Coalition at noccmi.org.
988!
Welcome back to History Now. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. Now, I want to talk to you guys about there was some situations that was going to go happen in France, or happen in Spain. And you could argue that this next subject, the War of the Spanish Succession, which took place from 1701 through 1714, could also have been seen as a civil war because there were supporters, there were Bourbon supporters, and there were Habsburg supporters in Spain. This was pretty much the battle of the Spanish throne. Charles II did not bear any children. He died in 1700. But there was a competition between who would be the next heir to the throne in Spain, between Philip V, who was supported by the Bourbons, and Charles VI, who was supported by the Habsburgs. Now, King Louis XIV and William III both tried to settle this diplomatically, but Charles II rejected the overture, and he decided to name Philip V the King of Spain. The Habsburgs did not take that very well, and it led to war between the Bourbons and the Habsburgs. So you had France and Spain representing the Bourbons, and then you had England, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire, mostly Austria at this point. So those were your sides for the War of the Spanish Succession. There was the Great Northern War that took place between Sweden and Russia from 1700 through 1721. You had Queen Anne's War in the Americas between France and Spain against England. Then you had Rakoczy's War of Independence in Hungary, which there was an attempt by the Bourbons, by Rakoczy, to declare independence from the Holy Roman Empire from 1703 to 1711. Unfortunately for Rakoczy, the Holy Roman Empire was able to stay together and was able to win that war. Now, the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph passed away in 1711. When that happened, Britain, after 1707, England and Scotland united to become Great Britain. They moved in for peace talks because, once again, there was a stalemate. You had the Peace of Bucharest in 1714. Philip V was recognized as the King of Spain. Part of the condition was he had to renounce his French throne because he was also in line for the French throne as well. So he was forced to renounce it in order to be the King of Spain. However, France got what they wanted because France was surrounded by the Habsburgs at the time. You had Habsburg Spain, you had the Holy Roman Empire, both Habsburgs, and France was a Bourbon. Now you have Spain, now a Bourbon country. So basically Spain is seen as an ally. So France was very happy to have Spain as an ally. Britain was able to retain the navy because they had the most powerful navy in the world. But this also left the Holy Roman Empire more weakened. And you would see, as we go over the next subject, which was the War of the Austrian Succession, basically that event would further weaken the Holy Roman Empire that much more. So the War of the Austrian Succession occurred in 1740 through 1748. Maria Theresa wanted to succeed her father, Charles VI, who died in 1711. There was also an opportunity by the Bourbons to again challenge Habsburg power in the Holy Roman Empire, mostly supported by Bavaria. And at that time, France was supporting Bavaria. Austria was supported by Britain. So once again, you have other events that are going on. Started in Europe. You had King George's War, which was between Britain and France in the Northeast, in the Great Lakes, and in Canada. You had War of Jenkins' Ear, which was between Britain and Spain, fought in Florida and the Caribbean. So you had battle in Europe, you had the battle in India, you had battle in Asia, and then you had the battle in the Caribbean, and you had the battles in the Americas. So the war went on for 8 years. You had the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, which ended the war. Maria Theresa did succeed her father and became the Queen of Austria. However, Prussia was also what we call in present-day Poland. They became the biggest winner in this. They were able to gain Silesia from Austria. They were able to gain it pretty early from the Austrians. But it also led to resentment from Teresa to Britain, because there was originally the thought that Silesia would go back to Austria. But the decision was made for Prussia to retain Silesia. So there was growing resentment towards Britain from the Austrians, because they were hoping to get Silesia back from the Prussians, because most of the countries were able to keep their territories up to the status quo. This led to the diplomatic revolution of 1756. So prior to that, Britain and Austria were allies, while France had an alliance with Prussia. This switched, okay? So France was able to settle the score with Austria, so the Bourbons and the Habsburgs settled their issue, okay? But then it also led to an alliance between Britain and Prussia. Now, the Dutch Republic, also known as the Netherlands, were originally pro-British, but they became a little more anti-British and went more of a neutral stance. They didn't necessarily ally with France, but they went more to a more neutral stance rather than being pro-British. All this was going on. You had the 7 Years' War, which majority of historians would call this a world war. This actually was started in the Americas, also known as the French-Indian War. This was fought in Europe, the Americas, India, Asia, Middle East. You had the Carnatic Wars going on in India, dating from 1744 to 1763. You had the French-Indian War. You had the 7 Years' War. And you also had the colonial wars that were going on between Great Britain and France, later with Spain. You also had the fight for German dominance between Prussia and Austria. Ultimately, competition for the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was declining at this point. You had British victory on all fronts. And it resulted in the Treaty of Paris in 1763. France cedes all of Canada to Great Britain, cedes Louisiana to Spain, and then Spain would cede Florida to Britain. Then you had all the events that occurred with the issue of taxation without representation, issues between Britain and the colonies. It led to the American Revolution from 1775 to 1783. I've covered this before in Path History Now. This was basically between the United States, France, and Spain versus Great Britain. There's also the Colonial War with France and Spain and Great Britain, fought in the Atlantic, India, Africa, Asia. It was settled in the Treaty of Paris in 1783. I made mention earlier the last battle took place in India, according to CNN. But as a result of the Treaty of Paris, Britain cedes all land east of the Mississippi River to the United States and also cedes Florida back to Spain. Now, the next one is the Great French War, which is the French Revolutionary Wars, which went from 1792 to 1802, and then the Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815. This took place in Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean, mostly the French Revolutionary Wars. You had the Haitian Revolution in Haiti, the Haitian Slave Rebellion against France to form a nation. Toussaint Louverture and Jacques I were very instrumental in the successful Haitian revolt, and it's the only successful slave rebellion to form a nation. It took place from 1791 to 1804 between Haiti and France. The French Revolutionary Wars was basically all of Europe versus France. So you had Great Britain, you had Austria, you had Prussia, you had Sweden, you had Norway, you had Denmark, you had Spain, you had Portugal. Everyone was fighting France. And at that time, the Bourbon dynasty was overthrown. King Louis XVI was beheaded, as was Marie Antoinette, his wife. You had the guillotine. You had France was going through a lot of changes. But then in 1795, Spain ended up siding with France. Then you had and then it ended in 1802, the Treaty of Amiens, which was a temporary peace. And it resulted in 1803, the Napoleonic Wars, which was fought throughout the globe. Again, you had France was able to go and defeat Austria and Prussia, and there was fighting in Russia. You had the Peninsular War with Spain and Portugal in Britain against France. You had the War of 1812, which was the United States versus Great Britain. Historians have questioned whether the War of 1812 was part of the Revolution or was it separate. In my mind, I tend to view it as both. It was part of it because the United States did not ally with France directly, it had happened during the same time, but it was also separate because it was a separate issue that the British were dealing with. But also Spain had sided with Great Britain during the War of 1812, mostly in Florida. France had went through a divine right monarchy, a republic, a dictatorship, a directory, an emperor, a constitutional monarchy. Spain would cede Louisiana to France in 1803, who in turn would sell it to the United States for $15 million, which is known as the Louisiana Purchase. But then France would go into Russia. They would take Moscow, but the harsh Russian winter forced the French and their allies back into France. It would encourage Austria, Prussia, Great Britain, and Russia to once again form the Grand Alliance, to form a major coalition, and they would ultimately defeat the French. The Battle of Waterloo, the Battle of the Nations. Napoleon was eventually forced out of power. He did retain power for 100 days, but then was defeated again. But as a result, at the end, Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia came out of the war as dominant powers. France would also be a dominant power as well, while Spain and Portugal were declining powers, both of them having lost their colonial empires in the Americas. The Treaty of Paris ended in 1814, ended the Napoleonic Wars, and the Congress of Vienna would, in 1814, 1815, set the balance for Europe. Now, to come back to history now, we're going to talk about World War I, World War II, the Cold War at present, when we come back to history now, here on ONTV.
The Friends of the Orion Township Library are looking for book donations and volunteers for their next gently used book sale. With the goal of promoting reading, literacy, and lifelong learning, the nonprofit organization began in 1985 and is the liaison between the community and its library. All but a fraction of the money raised by the Friends is donated for program funding, material, and monetary contribution for the library. If you are interested in learning more, please visit orionlibrary.org/friends.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. We last were talking about, we're at 1814, 1815, so nothing happens for a century, okay? Prussia would eventually become the dominant power, eventually becoming over between them and Austria, eventually becoming Germany. The Italian states would eventually unite, becoming Italy. Otto von Bismarck, who was the German chancellor, formed the Bismarck Alliance, which was of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And then you had the Entente powers between Great Britain, France, and Russia. These alliance systems would start to go into effect in World War I, which you had Archduke Francis Ferdinand was assassinated. I'm going to be as brief as possible because I'm going to cover these in future episodes. I have covered World War I. I've covered World War II before in episodes. Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. He was the Archduke in Austria. Austria blamed Serbia. Russia prepared to fight. You had the alliance systems. Germany declares war on Russia. Austria, and then France declares war on Germany. Germany declares war on France. Britain declares war on Germany. So now you have Germany, Austria-Hungary, later the Ottoman Empire, because Germany forged an alliance with the Ottoman Empire, versus Britain, France, and Russia. Italy joins on the side of Britain, France, and Russia in 1915. Japan joins early on in 1914 against Germany. They take advantage in Asia against the German colonies. The U.S. would join the war in 1917. Then you have the Treaty of Versailles. Ultimately, it leads to World War II. It leads to the rise of Hitler and Mussolini. Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy. Japan went more militaristic. Emperor Hirohito was the emperor at the time. Hideki Tojo was the prime minister. Germany invaded Poland. They had the non-aggression pact with Stalin. You had World War II. It was pretty much self-explanatory. The impacts of World War II led, as I made mention, to the Cold War, which led to proxy wars between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was fought from 1947 to 1991. You had Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cuban Revolution, issues with China. So then it ended in 1991 when the Soviet Union disintegrated. And the United States was really the only major superpower. Then you also, at present, you have the War on Terror from 2001 to present, which started after September 11, 2001, and that continues to this day. So the legacy of this the question is, was everything I mentioned a world war? That's the question I ask you. I ask you, the viewer. Would you view this as a world war? Would you view this as a European war? I'll let you jump to your conclusions. In my mind, these were world wars. They're all fought throughout the globe. But I'll leave it up to you to conclude whether or not, in your mind, it was a world war or not. That'll do it for History Now. Yeah, guys, I will see you soon. You take care, and you guys have a great day.